My name is Karen, and I'm 62 years old. I've lived a long, quiet life, one that was mostly spent caring for others. I'm a widow. My husband, George, passed away 10 years ago. It was hard losing him. He was my partner, my other half, and without him, the house felt emptier. But I managed. I had my work as a nurse, my shifts at the hospital, and the busy lives of my children to keep me occupied. It wasn't ideal, but it was what I knew. And in many ways, I was content. My son, David, was always the kind of boy who needed a little extra help. He was brilliant, but often aimless, chasing dreams that never seemed to land anywhere. After college, he worked a few odd jobs before he finally met Lisa. They got married quickly, and not long after, their first child was born. I supported them both, even though I didn't always agree with David's decisions. He was my son, and I loved him, so I did what I could to help. But it wasn't just the early years that wore on me. No, it was when they moved in with me after their second child was born that things began to shift. They needed a bigger space, they said. Lisa was struggling with her post-pregnancy recovery, and David was working long hours. The house I'd spent so many years caring for suddenly became our house in their minds. They didn't say it directly, of course, but the subtle hints were there. I never pushed back. I never argued. It wasn't my nature. I liked peace, and I thought, as I did so many times before, that it was just a phase. They'd get on their feet. They'd find their own place. It would all go back to normal. But somewhere along the way, I started to realize that I was no longer living in my house. I was a guest in my own home. The boundaries were blurred. They didn't ask before moving furniture around, shifting things in ways I had never done. They took over the kitchen, the living room, and even my garden. At first, I thought it was just because they were busy. Newborns, a toddler. It made sense, really. But then, one day, I noticed a pile of papers on the dining table with David's signature on them. "Mom, just sign these," he said one morning, holding up a stack of documents. "The bank needs confirmation of the address for the loan. It's just a formality." I didn't question him. I trusted my son completely. I signed. It wasn't the first time I had done so, and I didn't think much of it. I never read the fine print. I never thought I had to. But with every passing day, something inside me began to shift. They started making more decisions without asking. Lisa moved my things around without a word of permission. David came to me with more papers, more requests. The documents piled up like a silent warning, but I told myself it was all for their benefit. They needed it. They had kids now. They had responsibilities. Then, one day, while I was in the kitchen preparing a meal, I overheard a conversation between David and Lisa. It was something I had never expected to hear, something that shook me to my core. "If she doesn't leave, we will process it through the court. The house is already on us." My heart stopped. I didn't know if I had misheard. Was I imagining this? Were they really discussing me like I wasn't even there? But it wasn't my imagination. The next few days were filled with subtle changes. More papers, more signatures, more demands. And still, I remained silent. I told myself it was for their good, that everything would be fine. But I could feel it, the walls closing in around me. I was still the same person who had raised them both, who had supported them through thick and thin. But now, I was watching them slowly erase me from the equation. It was like I was invisible, as though I no longer mattered. And then came Thanksgiving. I had planned it all carefully, just like I always did. The turkey, the mashed potatoes, the cranberry sauce. The house was warm and filled with the scent of roasted food. I set the table with the old china I had inherited from my mother. I wanted this Thanksgiving to be special, to be our family day. I wanted to pretend, just for a little while, that everything was normal, that nothing had changed. But as I basted the turkey in the oven, Something inside me told me that this Thanksgiving would be different. It wasn't just the air in the house, it was something else. Something was coming. I could feel it. An hour before dinner, as I was finishing the last touches on the table, I heard voices from the nursery. If she doesn't leave, we'll process it through the court. The house is already on us. This time, there was no doubt. They were talking about me. They were planning to take my house. Everything inside me shrank. I wanted to scream, to confront them, but I didn't. I just walked into the dining room, finished setting the table, and smiled as though nothing was wrong. It wasn't that I didn't want to fight back. It wasn't that I didn't have the strength to stand up for myself. It was because I had never been one to fight. I had always been the peacemaker, the one who helped, the one who took care of everyone else. But this time, the silence was different. It was as though I was holding my breath, waiting for the moment when I would finally have to face the truth. But I wasn't ready to give up yet. I wasn't ready to lose everything. And that Thanksgiving, I would serve them something far more bitter than pumpkin pie. Thanksgiving Day was supposed to be a celebration. It was supposed to be about family, about warmth, about togetherness. But that morning, as I basted the turkey and set the table, I could barely keep my thoughts in order. The words I had overheard were echoing in my mind, pounding like a drum. They had planned this. They had planned to take my house, the one I had worked so hard for, the one that had been my home for decades. But I couldn't let it show. I wouldn't let it show. The kitchen smelled of roasting turkey. The mashed potatoes were smooth and creamy, and the cranberry sauce glistened like ruby jewels on the plate. Everything was perfect. Everything except the fact that they had already started to push me out, both physically and emotionally. And I was still just standing there, pretending nothing was wrong. David and Lisa were in the living room, keeping the kids entertained. I could hear their laughter, their casual chatter, as if everything was normal. But in my mind, everything had already changed. I could see it now, clearer than ever. They had already decided that this house wasn't mine anymore. Over the past few months, the lines had started to blur. It was subtle at first. Lisa, who had always been a sweet, quiet woman, began rearranging things without asking. I'd find chairs and tables in places I didn't remember putting them. The furniture in the living room was moved, and it wasn't just about making things more comfortable. It was as though she was claiming the space, my space. The real turning point came when David brought me a stack of papers one evening. "Mom, can you just sign these?" he asked, looking distracted. "It's nothing serious, just some paperwork the bank needs to process for the loan. They want confirmation of the address for the mortgage." I should have asked more questions. I should have read every line, but I trusted my son. I'd always trusted him. He had been through so much, losing his father when he was just a teenager, trying to make ends meet after college, struggling to get his footing in life. I thought this was just a formality, a simple thing. So I signed the papers. They were thick, heavy sheets, but I barely glanced at them. It was just a signature. That's all it was. But I didn't realize that the documents were far more important than I had been led to believe. The more I thought about it, the more I felt a sense of unease creeping in. There had been a time when I was the one in control of my home, my life. But now, I was standing in the kitchen, watching them take over little by little. Lisa had started bringing in new furniture, a shiny new sofa here, a set of modern lamps there. They'd changed the decor in the living room, throwing out old family pictures I'd put up, replacing them with new, more trendy artwork. Each change felt like a small cut, a slow erasure of the life I had built, and I remained silent. Then came the day when I really started to notice how far the boundaries had stretched. David came to me once again, holding another stack of papers. This time, his face was more serious. Mom, he said, sitting down across from me, this is just one last thing. The bank wants you to officially add me to the title of the house. It'll make the paperwork easier when we go to refinance. It's just a formality. I looked at him, but my gut twisted. This wasn't just about paperwork anymore. This was about my home, my life, and my control slipping away. But I didn't say anything. I didn't question him. I signed. David smiled at me, kissing my cheek. Thanks, Mom, he said, and then he left, taking the papers with him. That night, as I sat in the quiet of my living room, something inside me finally broke. I had always been the one who sacrificed, who gave, who kept the peace. But this wasn't just a sacrifice anymore. This was a surrender of everything I had worked for. The silence between us grew heavier with each passing day. David and Lisa no longer asked for my opinion. They no longer needed my input. They'd already made up their minds. They were in control now. I was just a guest in my own home. The next few weeks were filled with more subtle changes. The kitchen was rearranged again. They installed a new dishwasher without asking. I found the old coffee pot in the garage, replaced with a new expensive machine. The children's toys spread further into the living room, taking up space that used to be mine, and every time I walked into a room, it felt less like mine. It felt more like their home, like I was just a visitor. But I still said nothing. I still played my part. I cooked their meals. I cleaned up after them. I took care of the grandkids when they asked. I watched as they took control of the house that I had made a home. And all the while, I was growing more and more uneasy. I wasn't just being pushed out, I was being erased. I had done everything for them. I had given them a place to stay, helped them with their bills, provided for my grandchildren, but somehow they had taken everything from me. They had taken my home, and I had let them. Thanksgiving was coming, and I hoped it would be a chance to return to some semblance of normal. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be. The truth was out now. They wanted my house, and I had already signed away my rights without even knowing it. And so I did what I always did when things felt too heavy to bear. I cooked, I cleaned, I set the table and tried to pretend that everything was fine. I smiled and laughed, as I had done countless times before, hiding the storm in my heart. But I knew it wouldn't last. I knew that sooner or later they would show their true colors, and when they did, I would have to face the consequences. As the turkey roasted in the oven, I knew that the coming Thanksgiving dinner would be anything but ordinary. Something was about to happen. I could feel it in my bones, and I would be ready for it. The morning of Thanksgiving was crisp, the kind of chill that made you feel alive, awake, but also reminded you that winter was not too far off. The sun barely made it through the trees as I started my usual routine. The turkey was sitting on the counter, still cool to the touch, waiting to be seasoned and roasted. The mashed potatoes were peeled, ready to be whipped into creamy perfection. I moved like I always did, methodical, precise, the way I had done for years. I thought about my late husband, how we used to host these dinners together, making everything from scratch. He'd always carve the turkey while I'd be in the kitchen, fussing with the gravy and setting the table. He passed away 5 years ago, and though it had gotten easier, there were days like this when the absence of his presence felt so heavy I could hardly breathe. But today, I wouldn't let that cloud over me. Today was Thanksgiving. I was going to make it a good day. At least, that's what I told myself. David and Lisa were still asleep upstairs, and the kids were playing in their rooms. I could hear their little footsteps, the sound of toys scattered across the floor, but it felt distant, almost like I was outside the house, watching it all unfold from a different world. I moved through the kitchen like I always did, setting everything out, the cranberry sauce, the stuffing, the cornbread. I decorated the table with the mismatched dishes I'd collected over the years, each one holding a memory. But then, just as I finished fluffing the stuffing, I heard the soft murmur of voices drifting up the stairs. It was David and Lisa. The kids had gone quiet, and the house felt still. I froze for a moment, standing with the spoon still in my hand, the silence hanging over me. It was a strange stillness, one that felt too thick, too heavy. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to shake it off. It was probably just them discussing the final touches for dinner. But then I heard Lisa's voice, sharp and clear. "It's the only way, David. If she doesn't leave, we'll have to go through with it. The house is already in our names. We can process everything through the court if we have to. She won't have a leg to stand on." I felt the blood drain from my face. The spoon dropped from my hand, hitting the floor with a clatter that echoed through the house. I didn't move. I couldn't move. David's voice followed, hesitant. "Are you sure about this? It feels wrong." "It's what's best for us, David. The kids need stability. We need stability. We can't keep living in this situation. You know what they say, she's getting older. We don't want her to have a stroke or something while she's alone. She'll be better off in a retirement community." I closed my eyes, my chest tightening. It was happening. This was the plan all along. They had been setting me up, little by little, pushing me out without ever telling me the truth. My son, my own flesh and blood, had turned on me. And my daughter-in-law? She was the one pulling the strings, calling the shots. I couldn't stay in that kitchen any longer. I had to do something, anything. I finished setting the table, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling of betrayal that was threatening to tear me apart. I didn't want to face them now, not after hearing that, but I knew I couldn't let this go on. When everything was set, dishes, napkins, silverware, the candles lit just the way I knew they liked it, I took a deep breath and walked to the living room. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them. David was sitting on the couch, fiddling with his phone. Lisa was on the opposite end, folding laundry, humming under her breath. The kids were upstairs, playing. Everything seemed so ordinary, so peaceful. I almost couldn't believe it. But I knew better now. I moved to the kitchen and started setting up the dessert plates. Pumpkin pie, apple pie, and the homemade cinnamon rolls I had promised the kids. My hands shook as I placed the plates on the table, trying to steady myself. It was time. It had to be. As I brought the last dessert plate into the living room, I took a deep breath and pressed play on the dictaphone. It was a small device, easy to carry, easy to hide. Yesterday, while I was in the kitchen, I had set it up to record their conversation. I had been waiting for the right moment, and now it was here. I walked into the room, holding the plate in my hands, and set it down on the coffee table. David looked up, giving me a small smile. Lisa didn't look up from her laundry. "Dinner's almost ready," I said, my voice steady. "I've just finished the pies." They both nodded, smiling back. But I knew they didn't really care. They were too wrapped up in their plans to take everything from me. Then, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the dictaphone. I placed it gently on the table in front of them and turned it on. "I recorded your conversation yesterday," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I want everyone here to hear what you've been planning." David's smile faltered. Lisa's eyes widened in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Lisa said, her voice rising. "This is illegal." I stayed calm, my hands steady. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I replied. "I've had all the signatures verified. You've already signed away your rights to this house, David, and I have 72 hours to withdraw any consents you've made." The room went silent. You could feel the tension thickening in the air. They were frozen, their mouths open, but no words coming out. They were caught. David stood up suddenly, his face flushed. "Can we talk about this in private?" he asked, his voice tense, desperate. But I didn't move. I didn't let them off the hook. No, I said, my voice unwavering. I don't need to talk about this anymore. The truth is already out. I left the room, walking away from them as they stood in stunned silence, realizing what they had done. They couldn't take back what had been said. The truth had been served, and it had been served with dessert. The silence that followed was unbearable. The once warm, bustling house now felt like a cold, unfamiliar place. I sat at the kitchen table, still trying to wrap my head around everything. My heart was racing, but I kept telling myself I had done the right thing. I had taken control. For the next few minutes, I could hear David and Lisa murmuring to each other, their voices strained and low, as if they were still in disbelief. I didn't move from the kitchen. I didn't want to hear their excuses, their apologies, or their false pleas for understanding. I had heard enough. When I finally heard their footsteps approaching, I felt my pulse quicken. This was it. This was where they would try to talk me into backing down, where they would try to manipulate me into giving in to their plans. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. David appeared in the doorway, his face pale. He looked exhausted, like a man who had just been dragged through the fire and had no idea how to get out. Lisa stood behind him, her arms crossed, her face hard and unforgiving. Karen, David began, his voice quieter now, more cautious. Let's talk, okay? Just, let's just talk for a second. I didn't answer him immediately. I wanted to see how far he was willing to go, how deep into this lie he was prepared to dig. Finally, I looked up at him, meeting his eyes. Talk? I asked, my voice even, but with an edge to it. Talk about what, David? About how you've been planning to kick me out of my own home? Or about how you and Lisa were already making plans for my room? Lisa scoffed. This is ridiculous, Karen. You're making a scene. We didn't mean it like that. Really? I shot back, because it sure sounded like you meant it. You said it yourself, Lisa. We'll process it through the court if she doesn't leave. David winced at her words, and I saw a flicker of guilt cross his face. For a moment, I thought I might see the man I once knew, the son I had raised, break down in front of me. But that moment was brief. We didn't think you would take it like this, David said, his voice shaking now. It's not about you. It's about the future. The kids need a stable home, and I just thought that what? I interrupted, standing up from the table now. That you could take everything I've worked for and leave me with nothing? You don't get to decide my future, David. I've spent my life making this house a home. This is my life, my decision, and you've crossed a line. Lisa stepped forward, her face red with frustration. You're being unreasonable. The house is ours now. We've signed the paperwork. You can't just come in here with your dictaphone and ruin everything we've worked for. Worked for? I repeated, my voice rising with indignation. I bought this house. I helped pay for it. I've been here longer than either of you, and I'll be here long after you're gone. David and Lisa were both silent now, staring at me. I could feel their anger, their frustration, but also the unease that was beginning to seep in. They had no idea how to handle this. The tables had turned, and they didn't know how to get back on top. I already have everything I need, David, I continued, my voice steady but firm. You think you can intimidate me with your plans. You can't. I've already seen a lawyer, and I've made sure everything is in order. You're not taking my house. You're not taking my life. There was a long, tense silence as the three of us stood there, the reality of the situation settling in. I could feel the shift, the way the power dynamic had changed. They thought they had control, that they could push me out without a second thought. But now they were realizing how wrong they were. David finally broke the silence, his voice soft. What do you want from us, Karen? We can't undo what we've done, but maybe we can work something out. We don't have to go through with this. I shook my head, my lips tight. There's nothing to work out, David. You've made your choice. Now it's time for me to make mine. I turned away from them then, walking slowly toward the front door. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew I wouldn't let them win. Not like this. When I returned to the kitchen, I took a deep breath. I had to keep my composure. I had to remain calm. The storm was far from over, and I needed to stay focused. But as I heard their muffled voices from the other room, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory, one that tasted sweet and bitter all at once. They had underestimated me, and now they would face the consequences of their actions. That night, I didn't sleep well. The weight of the day pressed down on me like a heavy blanket, but I couldn't allow myself to rest. Tomorrow would bring more confrontation, more tension. I knew they wouldn't let go that easily, but I was ready. I had my lawyer, my documents, and my resolve. They might have tried to take everything from me, but they hadn't counted on one thing: me. The next morning came all too soon. The sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting a soft light across the table where the remnants of Thanksgiving dinner still sat. It was quiet, almost unnervingly so. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but my body, exhausted from the emotional toll of the past few days, moved on autopilot. I set the table for breakfast, but the act felt mechanical, like I was going through motions instead of truly living. David and Lisa had not spoken to me since our conversation the night before. They had holed themselves up in the guest room, no doubt coming up with new strategies to regain control. I could almost hear their hushed arguments through the walls, their frustration mounting as the reality of their situation began to sink in. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. As I stirred the coffee, I could feel the familiar ache in my chest. It wasn't the house I mourned. It wasn't even the life I had built here. It was the loss of my family, the one I had raised and nurtured for so long. They were still my children, my son and daughter-in-law, but they felt like strangers to me now. The betrayal stung in ways I hadn't anticipated. I heard footsteps behind me, and I turned to see David. His face was drawn, his eyes tired, but his posture was tense. He hadn't slept, I could tell. He had always been a poor sleeper, but now there was a sense of panic in his movements, as though he didn't know how to fix what had been broken. "Mom," he said, his voice softer than the night before, "we need to talk. I want to apologize for last night. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand." I didn't respond right away. I was too busy studying his face, looking for any sign that he might truly understand the gravity of what had happened. He stood there, hands shoved deep into his pockets, shifting nervously from one foot to the other. "I never wanted to hurt you," he continued. "I didn't think you would take it this way. It's just, I don't know. We've been struggling, and I thought it was best for everyone if we could, well, have the house. I thought you'd understand." I finally turned away from the coffee pot and looked at him, my gaze cold but not unkind. "Understand?" I repeated. "You thought I would understand you trying to take everything from me? You thought I'd just give up my home because you and Lisa decided it was better for everyone? How does that make any sense, David?" David's face reddened with frustration, but his voice stayed steady. "I wasn't trying to take everything, Mom. I just thought—" "No," I cut him off sharply. "You didn't think. That's the problem. You made assumptions. You thought you could walk in here and push me out as if I don't have a say in this. I built this house. I worked hard for everything you've had. And this is how you repay me?" He opened his mouth to say something, but I held up my hand, silencing him. "I'm done listening to excuses, David. You've crossed a line, and no matter what you say now, you can't take that back." His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, I saw the man he used to be, someone who knew how to apologize, someone who could admit when he was wrong. But the moment was fleeting, and it was quickly replaced by the defensiveness I had come to expect. Look, Karen, Lisa's voice interrupted, sharp and full of anger. She had appeared in the doorway behind David, arms crossed tightly over her chest. You've made your point, but this isn't just about you. We have kids, too. Do you think this is easy for us? For me? I felt a flash of anger stir inside me, but I tamped it down. I didn't have the energy for more of this. Not today. You don't get to make this about me, Lisa, I said, my voice low but firm. You don't get to twist this into some emotional plea. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences. The house is mine. The paperwork is in order. You're not going to change that. Lisa's face twisted with fury. You're so selfish, Karen. Do you think this is easy for us? Do you think we just wanted to push you out? You've always been so controlling, so difficult. We're just trying to get ahead, to give our kids a future. Why can't you see that? I couldn't help it. I let out a bitter laugh. You think this is about getting ahead? This is about power. This is about control. Don't pretend you're doing this for the kids, Lisa. You're doing this for yourselves, and you'll do anything to get what you want. David looked between us, his expression torn. Mom, please, we don't want to fight. We just want, we just want everything to be okay again. I shook my head slowly, feeling the weight of the years pressing down on me. It's too late for that, David. You don't get to rewrite this. You've already shown me who you really are. David's face fell, and for a moment, I thought he might break down in front of me, but then he stiffened, his eyes hardening. Fine, he said, his voice low. You want to play it this way? We'll see how long you can hold on to this house, because you won't have it for long. The words hung in the air, heavy with the threat they carried. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. I had made my decision, and no matter how much they pushed, I wouldn't back down. I'll see you in court, I replied calmly, before turning to leave the kitchen. I had done all I could. Now it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. As I walked away, I could hear them arguing again, their voices rising in anger. But I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had already taken control of my life. And no matter what happened next, I was ready for whatever came. The days that followed were a blur of tension and cold silences. David and Lisa kept their distance, but I could feel the storm brewing. I knew they wouldn't give up easily. But I also knew that I had something they couldn't take away from me, the truth. And the truth, as far as I was concerned, was worth more than any house, any money, any amount of power. And soon enough, the reckoning would come. It had been a week since that conversation, and life in the house had become a suffocating silence. I kept my distance from David and Lisa, focusing on my daily routines, just trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. The house, once filled with the warmth of family, now felt cold and foreign. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on my shoulders. I spent most of my time in the kitchen, cooking for myself, cleaning, and keeping my mind busy with tasks. The quiet seemed to get louder as the days passed. I knew they were still making plans, still plotting. Lisa had tried to talk to me a few times, but I refused to engage. There was nothing left to say. One afternoon, as I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting through some old paperwork, there was a knock at the door. I didn't need to look to know who it was. My heart skipped a beat as I stood up slowly, knowing that things were about to take another turn. When I opened the door, I found a delivery man standing there with a package in his hands. He looked at me with a polite smile, handing over a thick envelope. "This is for you, ma'am. It's from a law firm," he said, and I took the envelope from him without a word, barely managing a polite thank you. I closed the door behind me and ripped open the envelope. Inside was a letter, the kind of letter that people get when something important is happening, something that could change everything. I felt the familiar sting of anxiety as I read through the legal jargon. It was a notice of eviction, not from a landlord or a bank, but from my own son and daughter-in-law. The letter was a formal request, stating that due to my alleged inability to manage the house properly and citing their claim to ownership of the property, based on the signature I had unwittingly provided earlier, they were taking steps to evict me. The letter was vague, full of empty threats, but the message was clear. They were pushing forward with their plan to take the house. A wave of fury rushed through me, and for the first time since they had moved in, I felt a surge of righteous anger. I wasn't going to let this happen. They had underestimated me, and that was a mistake they would come to regret. I set the letter down on the kitchen counter, taking a deep breath as I reminded myself that I had already been prepared for this. I had known it would come to this. I had already taken steps to protect myself, steps that would ensure their plans would fail. I had already contacted a lawyer the day after Thanksgiving, and I had made sure to secure copies of the documents they had forced me to sign. Everything was in place. All I had to do was act. The next day, I drove to the law firm. The familiar office building stood tall and imposing in the downtown area. I walked in with purpose, my heels clicking on the marble floors as I made my way to the receptionist. "I'm here to see Mr. Hayes," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I'm Karen Wells. We spoke last week." The receptionist gave me a polite nod and buzzed Mr. Hayes's office. I didn't have to wait long before I was ushered in. Mr. Hayes was a middle-aged man with graying hair and glasses that perched on the edge of his nose. He rose from his desk as I entered and gave me a warm, professional smile. "Ms. Wells, it's good to see you again. I trust you've been well?" I nodded, not feeling like making small talk. "I've been fine," I said, and then got straight to the point. "I need to file paperwork to contest the eviction notice. I also need to ensure my signatures are validated and that my rights are protected." Mr. Hayes didn't hesitate. He went over the documents with me, his fingers skimming through them with practiced ease. "We'll get this sorted out," he said, his voice reassuring. "You've done the right thing by coming to us. I'll make sure everything is in order. You've got 72 hours to rescind the consent on those documents, but I'll need your confirmation to move forward with that." "I'm ready," I said firmly. I wasn't backing down. "I want them to know that I'm not afraid to fight this." He nodded, making a few quick notes on his notepad. "We'll make sure the court knows about their actions. You're well within your rights, Ms. Wells. You'll be able to keep the house." As I left the office, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had taken control of the situation, and there was no going back now. My next step was clear. I had to change the locks, secure the property, and prepare for what was coming next. The following week was tense, to say the least. David and Lisa knew the eviction notice had been served, but they hadn't yet realized that I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I had the law on my side, but I needed to be cautious. They were dangerous when cornered, and I couldn't afford to make any missteps. I took the precaution of changing the locks on the doors and installing an updated security system with cameras in every room. It wasn't just about protecting the house. It was about protecting myself from their inevitable retaliation. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. David came by one afternoon, knocking on the door with a tense expression. I opened it, standing tall, my posture unwavering. "I need to talk to you, Mom," he said, his voice quiet, almost pleading. "Please, just hear me out. We can work this out. This is a mistake. We never meant to hurt you." I didn't let him finish. You've had your chance, David, I said, cutting him off. I've already spoken to my lawyer. This is going to court, and there's nothing you can do to change it. David's face twisted with frustration, and I saw something else in his eyes: fear. He was starting to realize that he had pushed too far. I could see it in the way he clenched his fists at his sides. You don't know what you're doing, he muttered, his voice low. No, I replied calmly. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm doing it for myself. You can't take this house from me. He stood there for a moment, staring at me as though trying to gauge whether I was bluffing. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. Finally, he sighed, shoulders slumping. Fine, he said, his voice dripping with bitterness. You win, but just know this isn't over, not by a long shot. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had already won, and as he walked away, I knew that this would be the last time he'd ever try to take anything from me again. The weeks passed, and soon enough, David and Lisa packed their things and moved out. The house was still mine, and I had retained control of everything. The sense of victory, quiet and restrained, was all the sweeter because I hadn't had to shout or fight in the streets. I had simply outsmarted them. I watched them leave, knowing that their plan had failed and that I was finally free from their grasp. But in the end, the real victory was not in the house, but in myself. I had fought for what was mine, and I had won. The following Thanksgiving, I sat alone at the table. The house was quiet. I placed a single plate in front of me, along with a slice of pie. A voice recorder sat beside the plate, a small reminder of everything that had happened. I pressed play, and the soft sounds of an old song filled the room. I took a bite of the pie, savoring the warm sweetness. There was no bitterness left in me, only peace. I hadn't lost my family. I had saved myself. The house felt different now, quieter in some ways, but in others, it felt like it had finally found its true form. Gone were the tense moments, the hushed arguments in the hallway, and the constant manipulation. I had reclaimed my space, and although the silence was heavy at times, it was also a relief. The news of David and Lisa moving out spread quickly, and with it, whispers of what had transpired between us. Some of the neighbors who had once watched from a distance now approached me with sympathy in their eyes. They had always known something wasn't right, but they hadn't expected me to take such a stand. My lawyer, Mr. Hayes, had been right. It hadn't been an easy battle, but in the end, it had been worth it. The eviction notice had been invalidated, and with the proof of their deceit, David and Lisa had been forced to relinquish any claim to the house. But still, something gnawed at me. There was no joy in their departure. I had won, yes, but the aftermath of everything that had happened was bittersweet. David was my son, and no matter what, I would always love him. I had hoped, foolishly, that we could work through this, that the family I had tried so hard to keep together might one day heal. But I had learned that some things couldn't be fixed. I spent the following weeks immersing myself in the house, focusing on the things that had always brought me comfort: gardening, cooking, reading, and occasionally taking long walks around the neighborhood. The small, peaceful moments helped to restore a sense of balance, but even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. And then, one day, I received a phone call that I had not expected. "Mom?" The voice on the other end of the line was shaky, uncertain. It took me a moment to recognize it, but when I did, my heart skipped. It was David. "David?" I replied, a wave of emotions crashing over me. "Is everything all right?" He didn't immediately answer, and I could hear the hesitance in his voice. I, I don't know how to say this," he began, and there was a long pause before he continued. "I know things went wrong, and I know I messed up. But can we talk?" I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of his words settle in the pit of my stomach. I hadn't expected this. Not now, not after everything that had happened. It had been weeks, and I had assumed that was the end of it. But now, hearing the vulnerability in his voice, I realized that maybe there was still a glimmer of hope. Maybe David wasn't entirely lost. Of course we can talk, I replied, my voice steady but laced with the uncertainty I was feeling. I'm here. There was a long pause before David spoke again, his words carefully chosen. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to apologize. I made so many mistakes, and I hurt you. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I realize how wrong I was. I didn't treat you like a mother, and I didn't treat you like a person. I don't know what's going on with me, but I want to make it right. His words felt like a shock to my system, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The pain of what had happened between us, the betrayal, the lies, the broken trust, flooded my mind. But so did the hope that maybe, just maybe, this was a chance for something new. I don't know where to go from here, I said quietly. You've hurt me, David. You've done things that can't just be forgotten with an apology. But I'm listening. Let's talk. The conversation that followed was long and full of raw emotion. David confessed that he had been manipulated by Lisa, that his guilt over their actions had eaten him up inside. He admitted that he had been blinded by his own ambition, by the desire to have control over everything, and it had cost him his family, his mother. As he spoke, I could hear the regret in his voice, and I realized that he wasn't the same person who had walked out on me months ago. This David was different. He had grown, at least a little. I don't expect you to take me back into your life immediately, he said, his voice almost pleading. But I want to try. I want to fix this. I could feel my heart slowly opening, cautiously, but opening nonetheless. I'm not going to rush this, David, I replied. I need time, but I'm willing to try too. Let's see where it goes. We ended the call with a promise to take it one step at a time. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the right one. The following days were filled with a sense of anticipation. David sent me a few messages, brief texts to check in, to see how I was doing. I responded, but I kept my distance. I wasn't ready to let my guard down completely. Still, there was something in the way he reached out, in the way he showed signs of remorse. It gave me hope, but I knew not to get too ahead of myself. Trust was fragile, and it had to be rebuilt carefully, piece by piece. As the weeks turned into months, I began to see small changes in David. He came by occasionally to help with things around the house, and we spent a few quiet afternoons together. No grand gestures, no promises, just simple moments where we tried to reconnect. There was still a lot of pain between us, but there was something else too, the faintest hint of reconciliation. And then, one evening, as we sat together at the kitchen table, David looked up at me with a somber expression. I'm sorry for everything, he said again, his voice sincere. But I don't want to be the son who destroyed everything. I want to be the one who fixed it. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. We'll see, I said softly. We'll see. The road to healing was long, and I knew that our relationship would never be the same as it once was, but it was a road worth walking, one step at a time, and so we began again.